What's up, guys? Welcome back to Guys That Magic. It's me, Steven. We're going to go ahead and take a deep dive into Urza's Iron Alliance. For the $300 upgrade, David's bringing it back. David, say what's up.
Yo, what's going on, everybody?
Super excited to see this deck. Obviously, I did the Mishra 100 and 300. After looking at your 100, super terrified. I can only imagine what you did for your 300. With that being said, David, why don't you take us down the list, see what you got going on.
All right, so before we jump in with that, I do want to at least go ahead and mention that the $300 build is, in many ways, it's a build off of that 100. So if you haven't checked out that video, make sure that you do. We'll link it down in the description below. Also, we're going to post up onto the screen right now all of the 100 upgrades that we threw into this. So for the most part, they're all going to be included here. There is a special exception, however, and that is with biotransference. The $300 version actually does not use this card. We're going to upgrade it for something that I think just has a little bit more upside for the $300 list. So it did make the cut for the 100 as an add-on. It's not going to make the cut for the 300 for an add-on. In addition to that, we're also going to go ahead and just post up here on the screen some of the cards that we cut from the $100 list. And then if you have questions or anything like that as to why it is we removed those, make sure that you check out the 100. We explain our thoughts and reasoning on all of that.
Super sad to see biotransference go, by the way.
You know, it's a really good card, and I kind of thought with it, but there is another card that does a very similar effect that just has a little bit more upside. So I don't think I wanted the redundancy in this deck. But I mean, I don't think you would be wrong by including it still in this list.
I mean, fair enough, man. All right, well, everyone sees what we kept, what we got rid of from the 100. Take us down. I'm excited. Let's see this.
All right, cool. So with the $300 list, we're going to be sticking with the same kind of battle plan that we had for the $100 list, and that is essentially that we want Urza in play as soon as possible, and then we just want to be beating our opponents to death with those gigantic constructs. They get out of control super quickly, and because they're going to be massive beaters with Menace, hopefully our opponent's life total is just dropping. We do have two creatures that we're going to throw into this that are not artifacts themselves. However, they're both Urzas. The first one here is Urza, Lord High Artificer. This is 2 and 2 blue. It's a legendary creature, human artificer. It's a 1/4, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So that first ability is essentially the exact same thing that our commander already does. So he helps just to make sure that we're getting tokens out there even faster. He also says that you can tap an untapped artifact you control to add a blue mana, and you pay 5 mana to shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until the end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. If you've ever played up against a deck that is helmed by this Urza, the deck is typically absolutely insane. This card does a great job of generating mana. It generates that big beater for you. And then on top of that, if you do have enough mana to sink into this thing, he acts as, I don't necessarily want to say like card advantage, but he kind of just cheats things into play for you. This is a card that your opponents are going to want to kill on sight because his mana production, especially in this deck, is going to be absolutely nuts.
Yeah, I hate you so much. This card to see in play is just terrifying. I mean, the fact that you have the first Urza and this Urza, I don't know what to do right now.
Well, I think the best case or the best thing to cure Urza on Urza is to add another Urza. So the next card that we're going to be throwing in here is Urza, Prince of Krug. This is 2, a white and a blue, brand new card out of Brothers War. It's a legendary creature, human artificer. It's a 2/3, and it says artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. You can also pay 6 mana to create a token that's a copy of a target artifact you control, except it's a 1/1 soldier in addition to its other types. So he helps to bump up our team. Essentially, we're going to be doing one of two different things. We're going to be making either construct tokens that are already going to be pretty sizable on their own, so that +2/+2 is nice, but not necessarily going to be pushing us over. The second thing that we like to do with this deck is make Thopters, and those Thopters coming out as 1/1 flyers really benefit from this +2/+2. It beefs them up pretty considerably. We also really love the fact that he can make those additional copies of artifacts. There's plenty of shenanigans you can do with that ability, and at the very bare minimum, you can always just make another construct.
I mean, two solid, amazing choices, and the fact that there's 3 Urzas in here, I really like to think that that's why they named it Urza's Iron Alliance.
Yeah, dude, he's allied with himself and himself.
I mean, I feel like he's strong enough to where he could have been like, "Hey, Urza, let's go help Urza out," you know, like just something silly like that.
I like that. I mean, in the lore for this character as well, he is pretty self-centered. He's definitely somebody that like he's if the ends justify the means, like he's gonna do whatever he wants to do.
I think he's doing it. Speaking of doing it, we got two Urzas. You had any other creatures?
We did. So this deck obviously cares a lot about having artifact creatures in play, with our commander having affinity for artifacts. I went through and I added a couple of cards that I thought would really benefit this deck. The first one here is Spellskite. This is 2 mana for an artifact creature, Phyrexian Horror. It's a 0/4 with an ability that you can pay either a blue or 2 life to change a target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. This kind of just functions as a little bit of a safety valve for us. If our opponent tries to kill off our commander, we can always use Spellskite's ability to redirect that removal to it instead, so it kind of blanks our opponent's removal, at least temporarily.
No, always a good addition, dude. Spellskite's amazing.
We have Liberator Urza's Battle Thopter. It's 3 mana for a legendary artifact creature Thopter. It's a 1/2 with flash and flying. It says that you may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash, and whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator Urza's Battle Thopter's power, then you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Our deck has a ton of artifacts in it, so being able to cast them as though they had flash can be huge. We're also going to throw in Lion Sash, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite EDH cards to play around with. This is 1 and a white for an artifact creature. It's an equipment cat. It's a 1/1, and it says that you can pay a white to exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. The equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. And lastly, you can reconfigure this for 2 mana. So this functions not only as an artifact creature to make sure that Urza drops a little bit sooner, but it also helps to eat up some of our opponent's graveyards if our opponents care about them.
Nah, super solid. Not to mention you can always reconfigure it, and if you've removed a lot, which with 3 different opponents, you can only imagine you're going to be buffing this up pretty hard.
Oh yeah. We're going to be throwing Hope of Girapur in. This is a single mana for a legendary artifact creature Thopter. It's a 1/1 with flying. You can sacrifice it, and until your next turn, target player who was dealt combat damage by Hope of Girapur cannot cast non-creature spells.
Mean.
It is a little bit of an interference. Typically, you see this card a little bit more in combo-focused decks, which we're not. We're just kind of trying to beat face. But for 1 mana, you get a 1/1 flying that makes our commander cost 1 less, and it does have a relevant ability at times. I love this card.
Not to mention, as you mentioned earlier, you know, if you're making all these tokens of these Thopters that are flying in the air, you're making a bunch of these. That's going to be kind of aggressive.
Oh, absolutely. We have 2 other cards that I want to include in here, both of which are from the Brothers' War, so some new toys for us to be able to play around with. The first one here is Platoon Dispenser. This is 5 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 4/6. It says at the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more other creatures, draw a card. You can pay 3 and a white to create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. And in the case that this thing doesn't up die, you can always unearth it for 2 and 2 white. So decent body, some card draw stapled onto this, and additional artifact token creation. Lastly here for our artifact creatures, we have Steel Seraph. This is 6 mana for an artifact creature Angel. It's a 5/4 with flying, and it says at the beginning of your combat on your turn, target creature you control gains your choice of flying, vigilance, or lifelink until end of turn. And you can always cast this for its prototype of 1 and 2 white to have it come out as a 3/3 with those same abilities.
Some great abilities there.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to help us to be able to make sure that our construct tokens are able to connect and be able to deal with that combat damage.
All right, David. Scary creatures. Put anything else scary in this deck?
We're definitely hoping to add some other scary things in here. We have 1 enchantment of note. This enchantment is Anointed Procession. It is 3 and a white for an enchantment that says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. So obviously working really well with the constructs, and then even on top of that, works even better with those Thopters, allows us to get out of control with those pretty quickly.
Well, David, I will say Anointed Procession in any token kind of deck is terrifying to see get played.
Yeah, especially whenever those tokens are potentially 8/8s with Menace.
Yeah, I don't know why this card was 4 mana. I really do hate the fact it's so cheap to play.
I'm not going to argue with it in this. Makes this deck hum.
Well, speaking of humming, I think there was like a battle hum because I feel like you're about to announce two cards you added in here that are going to be really mean. So I'm going to go ahead and let you take it from there.
Yeah. So I feel like this wouldn't be an artifact deck if you're not gonna just, I don't know, be an asshole to your opponents. So we're gonna talk about the next two cards. They do form a kind of lock, and I'll go ahead and explain that. The first of the two is Mycosynth. This is 6 mana for an artifact. It says all permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. All cards that aren't on the battlefield, spells, and permanents are colorless. And lastly, it says that players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. The last ability on there, I don't really care about. But what I love about this is that this turns everything into artifacts. All of our permanents will become an artifact, which means that our constructs will get massive. We also happen to have some other cards in our deck that really care about those artifact synergies, things that give our artifacts flash. So this turns all of our things into flash. We have some things that allow us to play artifacts from the top of our library. So Mycosynth being able to just kind of turn all of that on and just make sure that we can constantly be doing those shenanigans. This card is really powerful, and this is actually the card that we are going to be putting in the $300 upgrade to replace Biotransference. Of course, Mycosynth best friend is also going to be making it into the deck, and that's Karn, the Great Creator. This is 4 mana for a legendary Planeswalker, Karn. He comes down with 5 loyalty and says activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. He's got 2 other abilities stapled onto him. The first one is a +1, and it says until the end of your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. And a -2 that says you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. Karn the Great Creator on his own is really just going to be used to animate artifacts in our deck using the +1 ability. His -2 is not very relevant in EDH. He does have the ability to grab cards from exile. Because of the way that EDH works, however, he can't just grab cards from outside the game. The real reason why we're going to be including this, though, is because of that passive that's stapled onto him, that activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. At a very bare minimum, this is going to shut off your opponent's mana ramp. It's going to shut down any of their relevant artifacts. So he does do a great job of limiting your opponents there. And with Mycosynth in play, he does create a lock. Because all of your opponent's lands are now going to be artifacts, and because he doesn't make the distinction between just abilities and mana abilities, he actually does prevent your opponents from being able to tap their lands. So pretty powerful effect with the 2 of them in play. They do create a lock where you're most likely going to be able to just win off that. The only real reason that you would potentially even lose is that if your opponent can deal enough combat damage to just take you out of the game with what they currently have in play. But if you're making massive constructs every turn, I don't think that's going to happen.
I feel like this deck is the one where when I see it sitting across from me or next to me, I'm going to go ahead and mulligan until I get a counterspell.
I mean, that probably wouldn't be incorrect. And one of the oddities of this deck is that even though we are a blue deck, we're not playing with counterspells.
So to see that, this deck as well didn't really run any counterspells, I thought it was kind of nuts. Like, out of 2 blue decks, one being Urza, and then Mishra, nothing.
Yeah, not really a whole lot of love for that archetype or just kind of control in general. I feel like for the most part, both of these decks, both Urza and Mishra, were much more focused around combat.
Which is what I like. All right, David. Mycosynth, Karn the Great Creator. 2 beautiful additions. What a beautiful lock. But I know the fun doesn't end there. What else we got going on?
So we talked a little bit about how this deck really wants to win through combat damage, and we're going to include a couple of cards that are going to help us do that. The first one that we're going to talk about here is Akroma's Will. This is 3 and a white for an instant. It says choose one. If you control your commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. It's got 2 modes, and both are pretty insane. The first mode says the creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn. The second mode says creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. If you cast this with your commander in play, it essentially just is going to win you the game or at least kill one of your opponents. Your constructs are already really big, and with all of these keywords stapled onto them, you're just going to pummel your opponents with damage. The second card here is Flawless Maneuver. This is 2 and a white. It's an instant. It says if you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. It also says that creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Although not necessarily a combat trick per se, it does allow you to attack in without having any kind of fear or repercussions that your creatures are going to die. And in both of these cases, at the very bare minimum, they'll save you from a board wipe.
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest with you, man, Akroma's Will is always an amazing addition into a deck that you're building a massive board state and definitely a game ender, like you said. Flawless Maneuver, never really seen, but I kind of like it, man.
Oh yeah, it's a great card. It'll come down and save you.
I think the best thing about both of these cards, though, is I love the fact that stapled on them is if you control a commander, you get both on the Akromas, and then you can not have to pay that tax. But I think the best thing about these cards is I don't really ever see a point where you might not have Urza on the field. I mean, the fact that he has an affinity for artifacts, I don't ever see you never having Urza out.
In playtesting this, the first time that you cast Urza is probably going to be the most challenging. Past that point, he actually is pretty easy to keep in play.
All right. Well, I love these instances. Anything else?
One final instant that we're going to throw in here. It's a little bit unrelated to the previous two, though. It is Whir of Invention. This is X and 3 blue for an instant. It has Improvise, and that says that your artifacts can help to cast a spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. It says search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost of X or less, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this is rather, it is an expensive tutor, and it is specifically only for artifacts, but it drops whatever we were looking for right onto the battlefield.
Yeah, this is an amazing card. And yes, in my opinion, you're right. It is an expensive tutor, especially if you're trying to grab like a 4 or a 6 cost. But at the end of the day, that improvise clause on here is amazing.
Yeah, we'll have some Thopters or constructs that are potentially sitting around at some point, so this will help to reduce the cost of this. And with it coming down at instant speed, we can really mess with our opponents.
Well, I do love those additions. Did you add any more utility into the deck? Any more artifacts, if I dare say?
To wrap up the rest of this, we did. So we are going to throw 3 more artifacts in here. The pre-constructed deck out of the box comes with all 3 signets of this respective color pairing. I am not a big fan of signets. I think that for the most part, there is just a direct upgrade for them, and that's going to be the 3 talismans. So, Talisman of Progress, Talisman of Dominance, and Talisman of Hierarchy. They all cost 2 mana. They're all an artifact. You can tap them for a colorless mana, or you can tap them to add one of 2 different colors of mana to your mana pool, but if you do, they'll deal 1 damage to you. The reason why I really like these is because you can activate these the turn that they come down, so you can activate these on turn 2 per se. And you can always just add that colorless, that way it's not hurting you. Even in a game where you do have to tap it for a color, I've typically noticed it doesn't do that more than maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of a game. So you're not going to be losing a ton of life. It's just the speed that these talismans have and the way that the signets require you to tap your mana a little bit funky. I really prefer the talismans.
No, I'm with you. I've always hated the signets as well. Not Arcade Signet, but the other ones.
Yeah. So, spoilers, we might be talking about those when we get to the cuts.
Awful. Well, until we get to the cuts, did you add any lands?
I did. So the mana base for this deck is really weird. It is running a lot of suboptimal lands, but the suboptimal lands oftentimes are either utility that we probably still want in the deck, or they're running the tapped artifact lands, which I'm not the biggest fan of 99% of the time. But in this deck, because they work so well with those constructs, they're going to stay in. With that being said, though, the mana base for this deck was far from premier, so we do have to fix it up at least a little bit. We're going to be adding in all 3 of the Pain lands, and right now is a perfect time to go pick them up if you haven't done so already, since they were just printed. The way that these lands work is that you can tap them for either a colorless, or you can tap them for 1 of 2 mana, and it'll deal 1 damage to you. So pretty similar to the talismans, just kind of with the exact same ability stapled onto a land. So here we have Caves of Koilos, Darkar Wastes, and Underground River. All 3 will be making the inclusion.
Paid lands be paid.
In addition to those 3, we're going to be adding in the lands that we got from the newest Return to Innistrad. Return to Innistrad. I don't remember how many times we've been there at this point. So Shipwreck March can tap for either a blue or a black. We're going to be running Shattered Sanctum and Deserted Beach. These lands work basically the exact same way. They're all part of a cycle together. You want to have at least 2 or more other lands by the time that you play them, but for the most part, that's not going to be a problem. If you do happen to have them in your opening hand, if you don't have a 1-drop, go ahead and drop this on turn 1. If you do happen to have a 1-drop, just kind of play around with your hand a little bit. Chances are you'll be able to cast this a little bit later on without any kind of penalty. I actually really do like these lands for EDH.
No, they're amazing. I pretty much run these in any deck that I have in these colors.
And then lastly, we're going to be making the inclusion for 2 additional lands. Both of these are a little bit more on the utility side. So the first one here is Inventor's Fair. It's a legendary land. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. You can tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay for and tap it. You sacrifice Inventor's Fair, search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. You can activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts, but those restrictions are really not very difficult to meet in this deck.
Yeah, I feel like any sort of artifact-themed deck, this is an automatic include.
Yeah, it's a fantastic card. You have a tutor stapled onto one of your pieces of your mana base, so it's a great inclusion.
All right, I do have a question because I had to answer this myself. How many times do you think you're going to forget the gain 1 life?
Every time, literally every single time.
Every time, dude.
Life is irrelevant in a game of EDH.
Life is irrelevant. Life is just a construct.
Exactly. But our constructs are big, so life is big.
Life is a big construct.
And then to wrap up the rest of our inclusions, the final card going to be making the inclusion here is Glimmer Void. This is a land. It says at the end of your turn, if you control no artifacts, you have to sacrifice it. But it has an ability where you can tap it and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It kind of serves as like an additional copy of Command Tower in this deck. You're never not going to have another artifact. Just keep in mind, don't play Glimmer Void on turn 1, because you might just kill yourself off with this. You might end up sacrificing this thing.
I mean, yeah, David, I love the lands we added. Definitely speed us through the game. I definitely love all the other additions. I don't think I'll love playing against them. But I think with that being said, unfortunately, even though we've added a bunch of beautiful cards, we do always have to cut cards. So why don't you run us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so we do have several cards, obviously, that we're going to be giving the axe to. The first couple are just generally expensive. I actually do like these cards, given their own respective play styles and patterns. The first one here is Shroom the Hegemon. This is 3, a white, a blue, and a black. It's a legendary artifact creature Sphinx. It's a 5/5 with flying, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it is a nice size beater. It does have flying, so it's got that evasion to help you get in. And it also brings in that recursion aspect. I do typically see that Shroom is a little bit better if you have more of a dedicated graveyard recursion theme. I'm just not really here to use another 6-drop in this deck. I want most of my artifact creatures to be a little bit lower to the ground to really help Urza out. Next up, we have Mirror Battlesphere. This is 7 mana for an artifact creature Mirror Construct. It's a 4/7, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, you create 4 1/1 Mirror tokens. Whenever Mirror Battlesphere attacks, you may tap X untapped mirror you control. If you do, it gets +X/+O until end of turn and deals X damage to the player or planeswalker that it's attacking. This card is actually really dope. It's a big beater. It makes those tokens for us. I actually really do love this card, but it costs 7, so we're never going to be able to cast it, and I don't care past that point.
I mean, fair enough.
Lastly, in the just really big and expensive and needing to be removed category, we have Shimmer Dragon. This is 4 and 2 blue for a total of 6. It's a creature dragon. It's a 5/6 with flying. It says that as long as you control 4 more artifacts, it has hexproof, and you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to draw a card. I do love the card draw. I still love the fact that this is a big beater. This is not an artifact creature, and we did want to kind of move away from this card for that reason. At the same time, I think that there's just better cards we can be including in this deck to lower the curve.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, especially with like the direction you're trying to go about making these big beater constructs. Do you really need a flying 5/6 dragon that is hexproof?
Probably not. A couple of other creatures did get removed from this deck. The first one here is Solemn Simulacrum, poor sad robot. He's 4 mana for an artifact creature golem. It's a 2/2, and it says whenever it enters battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and whenever it dies, you may draw a card. Sad Robot is not a bad card. I feel like he's very Precon friendly, so not in any way, shape, or form surprised to see he's in the pre-constructed list. It's just a card that I'm not super high on. He's got decent abilities, but the body on this is not good. And the mana cost at this coming in at 4 mana makes him a little bit odd. He's often competing for the same space that Urza, our commander, is, with them just kind of both. I'm going to say being 4 drops. I know that Urza is technically 6 mana. He likes to come down on turn 4 more often than not.
So sad that the sad robot was removed.
Yeah, he's going to sit off in isolation. We also have another robot that's going to be joining him. This one is Etched Champion. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature soldier. It's a 2/2 with Metalcraft, and it says Etched Champion has protection from all colors as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. All of you Affinity players are probably screaming at me right now, at least OG Affinity players. Etched Champion is a really good card whenever you need something that's just going to be able to block for days or be able to sneak in for damage. The problem here being is it's a 2/2, and we don't have a ton of ways to really buff it up in this deck. It is going to have that protection ability on it more often than not, which is nice. But we want to win with our big constructs, and Etched Champion I just felt like wasn't really pulling its weight in this deck. Lastly, here we have Armix Filigree Thrasher. This is 2 and a black for a total of 3 mana. It's a legendary artifact creature golem. It's a 3/2 that says whenever it attacks, you may discard a card. Whenever you do, target creature the defending player controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control, plus the number of artifacts in your graveyard. He is a nice little repeatable piece of removal so long as you can continue to attack in with him. Having only 2 toughness, though, means oftentimes he'll attack and die, so you're only going to be able to do this ability once.
Meh.
Yeah, I don't really want a 2 for I don't really want a 2 for 1 myself to get rid of one of my opponent's things. We are going to be making room for some of our other cards by cutting a couple more of the creatures in the deck. The first one here is Either Sworn Adjudicator. This is 4 and a blue for an artifact creature. It's a Veilkin Knight. It's a 4/4 with flying. You can pay 1, a white, and a black to tap it and destroy target creature or enchantment. You can pay 2 and a blue to untap it. This is a card that I have played around with many, many, many times over the years. And on paper, and whenever you read it, it always sounds like it does so much and that it is so good. And then you play with it and you realize it plays so much worse than it reads. I feel like for the most part, it's just incredibly slow, very mana intensive. And although the abilities on it are cool, I don't know if I've ever been able to actually do this more than maybe once or twice in a game.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. It reads amazing. But at the end of the day, I feel like there are definitely better ways to do this than paying 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 mana for, just to have one fun.
Yeah, it is an expensive card. We're also going to be removing Noxious Gearhulk from this list. This is 4 and 2 black for an artifact creature construct. It's 5/4 with menace, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. Noxious Gearhulk was probably the last card that I removed from this list, in all fairness. I did just happen to need the space for one more to get cut. I do really like Noxious Gearhulk. I don't like the fact that it costs 6. But I like the body for it, and I like the removal for it. So if you do disagree with any of the cuts that I've been making or with any of the inclusions that I've been making, Noxious Gearhulk is probably the first card I would put back into the deck.
I mean, yeah. I think this card's really fun in any kind of recursion deck, though, more than anything else.
Oh, absolutely. I run this in like my King Kenrith deck, and being able to use him again and again and again is amazing. We have Darksteel Juggernaut, which is 5 mana. It's an artifact creature Juggernaut. It's a star with Indestructible. It says that its power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts you control, and it attacks each combat if able. With big smashy things, we're going to be attacking regardless every turn, so that's not much of a downside here. Also, the Indestructible, pretty solid, and the fact that he's going to be massive is also really good. The reason why I cut this card, though, is because he's essentially just another construct for us. I don't really think that we needed an extra copy of it whenever a commander essentially makes cards that have, I don't want to say the exact same ability, but they function in the exact same role. They're big smashy things that are hopefully going to be getting bigger and beating our opponents to death. I wanted something to be able to help us push in for those attacks, so Darksteel Juggernaut did get removed. In addition here, we are going to be removing one final creature card from the list. This is Samwell, Avenger Ace. He is 1 and a white for a legendary creature human pilot. It's a 3/1. It says that as long as an artifact creature you control is attacking, prevent all damage that would be dealt to Samwell. It also says whenever it becomes tapped, exile the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast a vehicle or artifact creature spell from among them, put the rest onto the bottom of your library in a random order. He's a cool card. He does provide you with some card advantage here, and you're probably not going to whiff with him in the deck, but he's not an artifact creature in and of himself, and I did want to make room for some of our artifact creatures, so Sandwell gets the axe.
Oh, you missed a really good opportunity. Like, honestly, should have been like Sandwell, Farewell.
Farewell, Sandwell.
All right, David. So it looks like we got those creatures removed. What else did we get out of here?
So these next 3 cards are all really good in their own way. I actually really enjoy all of them, but we have kind of tweaked it up a little bit where I feel like we've either added some cards that do the exact same thing, but provide a little bit more value for us. So let's just go ahead and dive in with all 3 of these. The first one here is Unbreakable Formation. This is 2 and a white for an instant. It says creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. It also has an addendum where it says if you cast this spell during your main phase, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. They gain vigilance until end of turn. This is where we decided to throw in the cards like a Chromeless Will or Flawless Maneuver, which I feel like function in the exact same lane. They just are better cards.
Yeah, plus you get to cast them for free-ish.
Free-ish, yeah. A Chromeless Will is free-ish. Well, you get a bonus potentially for free.
Yes.
The next one here is Cranial Plating. This is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. You can also pay 2 black to attach Cranial Plating to target creature you control, and you have an equip cost of 1. I'm going to make the Affinity players mad once again. Cranial Plating is a really good card. It's one of the best equipment in the game. It does have 2 different abilities on there, the normal equip, and then it has that secondary ability where you can attach it. That pay 2 black you can do at instant speed, which is really nice because it means that if your opponent blocks whatever's attached to Cranial Plating, you can just rapidly shift it onto something else and still be able to make a huge hit. Ultimately, however, I did decide to make the cut here. I did want to focus a little bit more on making sure that our constructs are able to get in and not just making our constructs even bigger, because for the most part, they're already going to be like sizable enough where your opponents are going to need to deal with them.
Fair enough. I mean, I definitely understand the hardships of wanting to take this out, though.
Yeah, and then the last one that we're going to be removing here is an enchantment. It is Tempered Steel. It is 1 and 2 white. It says artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. We swapped this card out for one of the Urzas that we mentioned earlier. That Urza does the same kind of pump, but it also provides us with potential token production. So I felt like Tempered Steel just could be replaced.
Fair enough, David. I like that. I agree with it. Talk to me about these signets.
All right, so I'm going to remove all 3 of the signets that come to the Precon. We've kind of already alluded to this earlier on in the video. I'm not a big fan of these. You have to pay 1 mana to be able to use any of them. I think that the talismans are honestly just better in really every situation. They do hit you for a couple points of life here and there, so it is important for you to be mindful of that. But they're probably not going to hit you for more than maybe 2 or 3 life over the course of an entire game. And to have access to the speed and the non-clunky mana-based tapping that they provide, take the signets out. You'll be very happy. So Azorius Signet, Orzhov Signet, and Dimir Signet are all being removed.
Can't argue that. And lastly, David, I do believe you added some lands. Talk to me about the lands you got rid of.
So we're going to be removing a couple of lands from this list. The first one here is Sunken Hollow. This is it's an island swamp. You can tap it for either a blue or a black, but it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. This deck is actually not very basic land heavy. especially for it being a precon. We're running a lot of artifact lands to include, I don't want to say like the artifact basics, but what essentially is like the artifact equivalent of the basic lands. I don't remember the name of the cycle for them. But with that being said, Sunken Hollow is probably going to enter the battlefield tapped more often than not. For that same reason, we're going to be removing Prairie Stream. This card is also part of the same cycle. They work identically. I'm just not here for these tapped lands. Path of Ancestry is a really odd inclusion in this list. It says it enters battlefield tapped and that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, and whenever that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, you scry 1. This card is really commonly seen in tribal-based decks. We're not playing a human Artificer tribal deck, so I felt like this was a little odd here. It can tap for 1 mana of color from any of our commander's color identity, but aside from that, I mean, it's just kind of slow and doesn't really provide any value in this list.
Yeah, it was really weird because this was in, the Mishra deck too, and I took this out almost immediately just for that one reason. There wasn't any tribalness of that deck, so I didn't really understand the include on this.
Yeah, it's a little odd. There's a couple of other wizards and artificers that we've included or that have been in the precon. So I mean, it's not a total whiff, but more often than not, it's not providing utility.
I mean, I just feel like at this point, Wizards is just saying, "Hey, listen, it's precon. Throw Path in there."
I mean, they do have a tendency of reusing mana bases for these, and the mana bases are almost always bad. Speaking about more bad lands, we're going to be removing all 3 of the temples: Temple of Silence, Temple of Deceit, and Temple of Enlightenment. They're all part of a cycle as well. The way that they work is they enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever they enter the battlefield, you can scry 1. Temple of Silence can tap for a white or a black, Deceit can tap for a blue or black, and Enlightenment can tap for a white or a blue. The scry ability on these cards is nice, and if you do happen to drop these on a turn that you don't need the mana, that's fine. My problem here, however, being is because they do enter the battlefield tapped, these do really have the potential to trip you up and potentially kind of cost you a tempo play. I try not to play with the temples if I can get away with it.
Just makes me really happy that you cut these because I also cut the 3 temples out of my deck.
Yeah, they're not that great. And then lastly, to wrap this up, we're going to be removing 1 plains. So just 1 basic land is going to end up getting removed. That way we can kind of tweak this mana base a little bit.
I mean, I think that was plains to see. All right, David. Well, that being wrapped up, I believe you were given a budget of $300. How we looking, man? What did you spend? Did we save money? Did we spend too much money? Are you a cheater?
I am not a cheater, so we are right at that threshold. We are sitting at $293.58 as of the time that I totaled all of this up, at least. So we are a little bit below that budget. With that being said, though, we are including a couple of cards that were just released from Brothers War, so we'll see how those prices do end up impacting whenever the cards really kind of hit the market. As of the time of this recording, Brothers War just became available, so a lot of those prices are still going to be in fluctuation. It does give you a little bit more wiggle room there, though. If those cards do increase in price, you'll still be able to include it on that $300 budget. So yeah. And of course, if they do end up dropping, maybe you'll even have a little bit more cash. So go out and buy, I don't know, a Shockland or something. Go have fun.
Go have fun. All right, well, David, before we get into the outro, is there anything you'd like to add to the deck? Is there anything you'd like to say to the people?
If you like big smashy decks, I do think this is going to be something you're going to have fun with. If you like artifact decks, this will probably be something that you'll have fun with. If you like aggressive, super fast decks, I don't actually think that you're going to have a fun time here. This is much more of a slow to build, kind of like a snowball-esque deck where in the beginning, opening turns, you're probably not doing a ton, but in the late game, you'll start taking over.
I mean, all 3 of those points sound fun to me. But with that being said, that does conclude David's Urza's Iron Alliance $300 upgrade. Thank you guys so much for sticking through the whole thing with us. We greatly do appreciate you guys. Don't forget to follow us on all of our social platforms. We have YouTube, we have a Twitter, we have an Instagram, and not to mention a TikTok. It's Guys at Magic for all of our platforms. Let us know down below in the comments. What did David do that you hated? Not much for me, But you might have an opinion, and we want to hear those opinions. We definitely do appreciate them. What did David do that you really liked? There was a lot in there for me. Somebody maybe not so much. But with that being said, guys, thank you again. We're out of here.
Peace.